Late 1960s. Waverley, Nova Scotia. If you were chasing rock stardom, this was practically the last place you'd choose to begin. There were no major labels nearby, no industry insiders, no pipeline to fame, just harsh Atlantic winters and a belief that maybe Canadian musicians could compete on the world stage. The foundation of the band formed in 1969. Brothers David and Richie Henman teamed up with their cousin Jim. Guitar, drums, bass, the framework was there. But something crucial was missing, a voice. Not just someone to sing, but someone who could write songs that carried weight. That missing piece arrived in the form of Myles Goodwyn, a guitarist and vocalist from Woodstock, New Brunswick. Goodwyn brought more than talent, he brought structure, ambition, and a songwriter's instinct that would shape the band's identity for decades. The name April Wine wasn't the result of deep symbolism. They simply liked how it sounded. But behind that casual choice was a bold commitment: they would perform original material. At a time when most local acts survived by covering top 40 hits at school dances and church halls, this decision was risky. Original songs didn't guarantee bookings. In fact, they nearly guaranteed the opposite. The $100 gamble. By 1970, it became painfully clear that Nova Scotia couldn't support their ambitions. They mailed a demo tape to two executives at Aquarius Records in Montreal. The reply was polite, something along the lines of, "If you're ever in town, we'd be happy to meet." Most bands would have taken that as a courtesy response. April Wine took it as an invitation. In April 1970, they arrived in Montreal with their gear and roughly $100 between them. The label executives were reportedly stunned. This wasn't a scheduled meeting, it was a leap of faith. But that boldness mattered. The sheer nerve of showing up unannounced, ready to bet everything, earned them a recording contract. Paying their dues. Montreal wasn't glamorous. It was grinding, exhausting, and unforgiving. They toured Eastern Canada for months alongside Mashmakan, playing cramped clubs and university halls. They slept in vans. They hauled their own equipment through snow and ice. After each show, they'd tear down the stage, drive for hours, and repeat the process the next night. This wasn't the rock and roll fantasy sold in magazines. This was survival. Their debut album, April Wine, 1971, proved they belonged in the conversation. The single, Fast Train, cracked Canada's top 40, peaking at number 38. It wasn't a breakout smash, but it was enough to keep the lights on and justify another record. A major milestone came on July 30, 1971, when they opened for the Guess Who, one of Canada's biggest musical exports at the time. Standing before a crowd that recognized their name was more than validation, it was confirmation that the dream wasn't foolish after all. Cracks in the foundation. Success, even modest success, came at a cost. In late 1971, bassist Jim Henman left the band to return to university. The uncertainty of a music career weighed heavily. Stability won that round. His replacement, Jim Clench, brought a heavier, more assertive bass presence. The lineup was evolving. But change always carries tension. The brotherhood that started in a small Nova Scotia town was beginning to shift. Still, momentum was building. Their second album, On Record, 1972, pushed them further into the spotlight. It broke into the Canadian top 40 album charts and delivered two major hits, a fiery rendition of Elton John's Bad Side of the Moon, and their take on You Could Have Been a Lady, originally recorded by Hot Chocolate. The gamble was paying off. But the higher they climbed, the more fragile everything became. When You Could Have Been a Lady climbed to number 2 on the Canadian charts and even slipped onto the US listings, it changed everything. For a band that started in small-town Nova Scotia, this wasn't just chart movement, it was proof that the ceiling they'd imagined might not exist at all. But momentum has a price. Fracture lines. While recording their third album, Electric Jewels, 1973, internal tensions finally erupted. David and Richie Henman walked away. The split created a clear divide, Myles Goodwyn and Jim Clench on one side, the founding brothers on the other. It's a familiar story in rock history. When one creative force begins steering the ship more aggressively, balance shifts. And sometimes it breaks. The shake-up, however, proved transformative. Drummer Jerry Mercer, formerly of Mashmakhan, joined alongside guitarist Gary Moffat. Their arrival sharpened the band's sound. The loose, scrappy club act evolved into a polished, high-voltage arena contender. Electric Jewels became a cornerstone release. Songs like Weeping Widow turned into staples of Canadian classic rock radio. April Wine were no longer just surviving, they were defining the sound of a generation at home. Ruling Canada. By 1975, their dominance in Canada was undeniable. Stand Back achieved something unprecedented. It became the first album by a Canadian band to sell over 100,000 copies domestically, eventually reaching platinum status. On stage, they escalated everything. The Electric Adventure Tour featured flashing red lights, blaring fire bells, and theatrical production elements that elevated their concerts into full-blown spectacles. This wasn't a bar act anymore. It was arena rock. Then came 1976. The Whole World's Goin' Crazy made history by going platinum in Canada based solely on advance orders, before fans even had the record in their hands. Turn on a radio anywhere in the country, and odds were you'd hear April Wine. They had conquered Canada. But behind the triumph, cracks were spreading. The cost of victory. The touring schedule grew brutal, nearly non-stop. Year-round travel. Families left behind. Relationships strained to the breaking point. What they'd chased for years was now consuming them. Success demanded constant motion, and motion leaves little room for stability. To break beyond Canada, they needed something bigger than radio hits. They needed credibility south of the border. That catalyst arrived in March 1977 at a small club in Toronto, the El Macambo. The Decoy Show. Officially, April Wine were booked to perform a charity event. Unofficially, something far more explosive was happening. The venue was secretly hosting the Rolling Stones, who were playing under the alias, the Cockroaches. A local radio contest teased fans with the question, "What would you do to see the Rolling Stones live?" The winners were told they'd be attending an April Wine show. Only after they were bussed to the venue did the truth come out. They weren't just watching a concert, they were witnessing a secret club performance by the biggest rock band in the world. April Wine's sets from those nights were later captured on Live at the El Macambo. But more importantly, their connection to the Stones opened doors. Suddenly, they had the credibility to tour the United States, not just alone, but alongside giants like Styx, Rush, and Journey. The international stage was no longer out of reach. The three-guitar assault. Later in 1977, they made a bold structural change, adding guitarist Brian Greenway. The band expanded into a five-piece powerhouse, built around a triple guitar attack that delivered a thicker, more aggressive wall of sound. It became their signature. The 1978 album First Glance marked another breakthrough, their first gold-certified record outside Canada. The single, Roller, cracked the U.S. Top 30, gaining particularly strong traction in cities like Detroit and Flint, Michigan. For the first time, April Wine weren't just Canadian rock royalty. They were becoming a North American force. And yet, as history would prove, the higher they climbed, the steeper the fall waiting beneath them. Roller wasn't just another single, its grinding riff and driving rhythm connected deeply with America's industrial belt, where loud guitars and working-class energy defined the culture. By 1979, Harder, Faster pushed April Wine firmly into arena rock territory. Tracks like I Like to Rock and Say Hello dominated radio on both sides of the border. The album stayed on the Billboard 200 chart for 40 weeks. They weren't simply riding a wave, they were becoming a fixture. But behind platinum certifications and sold-out arenas, the pressure was mounting. Myles Goodwyn had become the band's creative engine, chief songwriter, frontman, producer. And engines, when pushed too hard for too long, overheat. The peak. In January 1981, they released The Nature of the Beast. It would go on to sell over 1 million copies in the United States and reach multi-platinum status in Canada. The album blended their gritty hard rock roots with a sharper melodic edge. The centerpiece was the power ballad, Just Between You and Me. It cracked the top 25 on the Billboard Hot 100, but its real impact came months later. On August 1, 1981, MTV launched. Just Between You and Me was the 14th video ever aired, making April Wine the first Canadian act to appear on the channel. Before Madonna became a global icon. Before Michael Jackson revolutionized music video with Thriller. Before the British New Wave reshaped the charts. April Wine were already there. Their performance at the Monsters of Rock festival at Castle Donington in front of 60,000 fans proved they were no longer scrappy underdogs, they were global contenders. Yet the victory felt complicated. Constant touring. Media obligations. The unrelenting expectation to repeat platinum success. The Nature of the Beast peaked at number 24 on the Billboard album chart, and suddenly the band was omnipresent: radio, television, magazines, arenas. Goodwyn would later admit the triumph felt like a trap. Every hit raised expectations. Every success demanded something bigger next time. The joy of making music slowly gave way to the anxiety of maintaining momentum. Slow unraveling. The decline didn't happen overnight. It crept in. Power Play, 1982, performed respectably, reaching the Billboard Top 40 and producing songs like Enough Is Enough, but it failed to match the lightning strike of its predecessor. Internally, resentment brewed. Goodwyn carried the songwriting burden almost alone. The others performed the material, but he built it. In his memoir, he would describe the isolation that came with being the sole architect of the band's hits. Seeking distance from the pressure, Goodwyn relocated to the Bahamas in the early 1980s. The beaches and warm air offered escape, but also created physical and emotional separation at the exact moment unity was most needed. Recording sessions for Animal Grace, 1984, exposed fractures that could no longer be ignored. Creative disagreements turned heated. Old grievances resurfaced. The chemistry that once felt electric now felt corrosive. And the industry itself was changing. MTV culture and synth-driven new wave were reshaping popular taste. Arena rock, once dominant, was beginning to feel out of step with a visually driven, keyboard-heavy era. Though April Wine had been early MTV participants, their blue-collar, guitar-first identity suddenly seemed dated to tastemakers. The first goodbye. In 1984, recognizing the strain was unsustainable, the band announced a farewell tour. Their final show of that era took place in Kelowna, British Columbia, on July 31, 1984. The Brotherhood fractured. The machine stopped. The years that followed were quiet. Goodwyn remained in the Bahamas before returning to Montreal and releasing a solo album in 1988. Other members pursued production work and separate musical projects. The roar of arenas faded into memory. Then, unexpectedly, came 1992. After 8 years apart, April Wine reunited for what was meant to be a short Canadian run. The response was overwhelming. Packed venues across Canada and the US proved their audience had never really left. The reunion sparked a new album, Attitude, 1993, which achieved gold status in Canada. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, they toured steadily, 80 to 100 shows annually, operating as a legacy act. Fans came for nostalgia, for the songs that defined their youth. The hidden cost. But behind the curtain, the toll lingered. For Goodwyn, alcohol had begun as a coping mechanism for stress. Over time, it became dependence. In 2008, severe internal bleeding nearly cost him his life. The scare forced a reckoning, leading to sobriety and, in 2016, the publication of his memoir, Just Between You and Me. In it, he laid bare the personal cost of fame, fractured relationships, lost years, and the emotional price of sustaining a rock empire. Health challenges continued. Diabetes made touring increasingly difficult. On December 30, 2022, Goodwyn officially retired from performing, prioritizing his well-being. He passed away on December 3, 2023, at age 75, the end of the band's original creative force. Legacy. Despite lineup changes and time's passage, April Wine's catalog remains embedded in North American classic rock radio. Their influence has been formally recognized. Induction into the Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame in 2009, a star on Canada's Walk of Fame in 2023, and Myles Goodwyn's induction into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. More than 20 million records sold. Over 20 studio albums. Countless live releases. But numbers only tell part of the story. For listeners who remember hearing, "I Like to Rock," blasting from a car stereo or slow dancing to "Just Between You and Me," April Wine represents more than chart success. They symbolize possibility, the idea that even a band from remote Atlantic Canada could conquer arenas and pioneer a new television era before the world understood what music videos would become. Their journey carried triumph and sacrifice in equal measure. Health lost. Relationship strained. Brotherhood tested. Yet the songs endure. And perhaps that's the ultimate measure. Not the platinum plaques or sold-out shows, but the fact that decades later, those melodies still spark memories of summer nights, first loves, and a time when everything felt wide open. If April Wine meant something to you, what's the memory that still stands out?